Well, hey there, first grade. Here we are on Wednesday, right? It's Wednesday, and we are just about finished with Ramona the Brave. And when we left off yesterday, Mrs. Griggs had finally called on Ramona so that she could lead the Pledge of Allegiance. But do you remember what had happened? She lost her shoe, right? And so she didn't want Mrs. Griggs to know. So she had her foot kind of tucked up away. And so finally, Mrs. Griggs started to tell her that she had kind of been chased by a dog that morning, and she had taken her shoe off and thrown it at the dog. And so now we're going to find out what's going to happen. We know Mrs. Griggs is pretty tough, so it's going to be interesting to see how she deals with Ramona being at school with only one shoe on. Why, that's too bad, said Mrs. Griggs, which surprised Ramona. Somehow she had not expected her teacher to understand. Mrs. Griggs continued, I'll call the office and ask the secretary to telephone your mother and have her bring you another pair of shoes. My mother isn't home, said Ramona. She's at work. Well, don't worry, Ramona, said Mrs. Griggs. We have some boots without owners in the cloakroom. You may borrow one to wear when we go out for recess. Ramona was familiar with those boots, none of them related and all of them a dingy brown, because no one would lose a new red boot. If there was one thing Ramona did not like, it was old brown boots. They were really ugly. She could not run and play kickball in one shoe and one boot. Spirit and spunk surged back into Ramona. Mrs. Griggs meant well, but she did not understand about boots. Miss Benny would never have told Ramona to wear an old boot, and she made up her mind she was not going to wear an old brown boot. Once Ramona had made this decision, it was up for her to decide what to do about it. If only she had some heavy paper and a stapler, she could make a slipper, one that might even be strong enough to last until she reached home. She paid attention to number combinations in one part of her mind, while in the private place in the back of her mind, she thought about a paper slipper and how she could make one if she only had a stapler. A stapler, where could she find a stapler? Mrs. Griggs would want an explanation if she asked to borrow room 1 stapler. To borrow Miss Benny's stapler, Ramona would have to run across the playground to the temporary building, and Mrs. Griggs was sure to call her back. There had to be another way. And there was, if she could only make it work. When recess finally came, Ramona was careful to leave the room with several other members of her class and to slip down to the girls' bathroom in the basement before Mrs. Griggs could remind her to put on the boot. She jerked 4 rough paper towels out of the container by the sinks. She folded 3 of the paper towels in half, making 6 layers of rough paper. The 4th towel she folded in thirds, which also made 6 layers of paper. Now came the scary part of her plan. Ramona turned to the hall, which was empty because both first graders were out on the playground. The doors of the classrooms were closed. No one would see the brave thing she was about to do. Ramona climbed the stairs to the first landing, where she paused to take a fresh grip on her courage. She had never gone to the upstairs hall alone. First graders rarely ventured there unless accompanied by their parents on open house night. She felt small and frightened, but she held fast to her courage as she ran up to the second half of the flight of stairs. Ramona found Mr. Cardozo's room. She quietly opened the door a crack. Mr. Cardozo was telling his class, spelling secretary is easy. Just remember the first part of the word is secret, and think of a secretary as someone who keeps secrets. You will never again spell the word with 2 A's instead of 2 E's. Ramona opened the door a little wider and peeked inside. How big the desks looked compared to her own down in room 1. She heard the whir of a wheel spinning in a mouse's cage. Mr. Cardozo came over to investigate. He opened the door wider and said, Oh, hello, Ramona Q. What may we do for you? There was Ramona standing on one foot, trying to hide her dirty sock behind her shoe, while Beezus' whole class, and especially Beezus, stared at her. Beside her classmates, Beezus did not look so big as Ramona had always thought her to be. Ramona was secretly pleased to discover her sister was a little less than medium size. Ramona wondered how Beezus would report this scene at home. Mother! The door opened, and there was Ramona, standing with one shoe on. Ramona refused to let her courage fail her. She remembered her manners and said, May I please borrow your stapler? I can use it right here in the hall, and it will only take a minute. Once again, she had that strange feeling of standing aside to look at herself. Was she a funny little girl whom Mr. Cardozo would find amusing? Apparently not, because Mr. Cardozo did not hesitate. Certainly, he said, and strode to his desk for the stapler, which he handed to her without question. Mrs. Griggs would have said, Tell me why you want it, Ramona. Miss Benny would have said, Won't you let me help you with it? Mr. Cardoza closed the door, leaving Ramona in the privacy of the hall. Ramona knelt on the floor and went to work. She stapled the 3 paper towels together, the towel folded in thirds. She placed at one end of the other towels and stapled it on 3 sides to make the toe of the slipper. She had to push down hard with both hands to force the staples through that much paper. Then she turned her slipper over and sent staples through in the other direction to make it stronger. There, Ramona slid her foot into her slipper. With more time and a pair of scissors, she could have made a better slipper with a rounded toe, but this slipper was better than an old boot, and it should last all day, school paper towels being what they were. Ramona opened the door again and held out the stapler. Mr. Cardoza looked up from the book in his hand and walked over to take the stapler from her. "Thank you, Mr. Cardoza," she said, because she knew he was expecting good manners. "You're welcome, Ramona Q," said Mr. Cardoza, with a smile that was a friendly smile, not an amused by a funny little girl smile. "We're always glad to be of help." Ramona had not felt so happy since she was in Miss Benny's kindergarten. Too bad Beezus had first dibs on Mr. Cardoza. Ramona might have married him herself someday if she ever decided to get married. She reached room 1 just as the 2 first grades were returning from recess. She heard someone from room 2 say, "Ramona must have hurt her foot." Someone else said, "I bet it hurts." Ramona began to limp. She was enjoying the attention her slipper attracted. "Oh, there you are, Ramona," said Mrs. Griggs, who was standing by her door to make sure that her class entered the room in an orderly manner. "Where have you been? We missed you on the playground." "I was making a slipper." Ramona looked up at Mrs. Griggs. "I didn't want to wear a dirty old boot." She had not felt so brave since the day she started off the first grade. "After this, you should ask permission to stay in during recess," Mrs. Griggs said, looking down at the slipper. "You've made a very good slipper." Encouraged by this bit of praise, Ramona said, "I could make it a better slipper if I had scissors and crayons. I could draw a bunny face on the toe and make ears like a real bunny slipper." Mrs. Griggs' expression was thoughtful. She seemed to be studying Ramona, who shrank inside herself, uncertain as to what her teacher might be about to say. Mrs. Griggs looked more tired than cross, so Ramona summoned her spunk and said, "Maybe I could finish my slipper instead of making a Thanksgiving turkey?" "Well, we always," began Miss Griggs, and changed her mind. "I don't see why not," she said. Mrs. Griggs approved of her. Ramona smiled with relief and pretended to limp to her seat as her teacher closed the door. She no longer had to dread turkeys or her teacher. So that's what happened with Ramona and her slipper. Now, I will tell you, we don't have much left in this chapter, maybe 3 pages. So tomorrow's chapter book read aloud is going to be very, very short, but you'll get to see how Ramona the Brave ends. I've enjoyed reading this story to you. I hope that you read some more stories by Beverly Cleary, Ramona and Henry and Beezus and Ribsy. There's a whole series of characters that you'll just love. All right, guys, have a great afternoon, and I'll see you in the morning.